Hello, everybody. So today we are going to shift gears a little bit and get into some new isms. We've been talking about conservatism quite a bit in the series so far, but we're going to change it up a little bit. Now, let's get to a quick word on isms and a quote from the immortal Ferris Bueller. And yes, you're like, wait a minute, you're a teacher who's giving a quote by a kid who skipped school. Yes, not condoning the skipping of school, but let's look at the quote. Not that I condone fascism or any ism for that matter. Isms, in my opinion, are not good. A person should believe in an ism. Should not believe in an ism, he should believe in himself. And I need you to understand that. We're going to talk about all these isms, and people are going to often categorize themselves today as a believer in some type of ism, but understand your opinions are your own, and movements come and movements go, but you're still an individual. Now, one thing we are going to see here is the birth of something we refer to as liberalism, if you will. Okay, and what's really influencing these folks are the Enlightenment and the American and Latin revolutions, and the people involved are often the industrial middle class. Not only the people who are working in the factories, who, as we've said so far, their rights are almost optional, but a lot of the kind of the mid-level people that are making a decent living and stuff, but politically they really just don't have a lot of rights and or representation, and so that's what's going to go involved. They want to be over here on the left. They want to have members in Congress and areas like the House of Commons or the Chamber of Deputies and all that type of stuff. So there are two types of liberalism. Well, not two types, but there's a couple different types of liberalism we're going to talk about. And one is referred to as economic liberalism. And the ideas behind that are in the 1800s. Now, we need to understand that liberalism and conservatism and ism, they morph over time. So we are in the mid to late 1800s at this point in Europe. So economic liberalism is that of laissez-faire economics, that the government should not interfere in the natural flow of business. Modern day, that would actually be considered to be a more conservative view. The roles, again, of the governments are defense of the country, police protection of individuals, which is important, and construction and maintenance of public works that are too big for companies. Pure conservatism say like kind of countries or companies should do whatever they want. So here there is a role for the government. This is going to be important just in general in liberalism, that the government is going to have a role here, okay? And one of the roles is to preserve economic liberty, that people should have options to get jobs, people should have options to buy whatever they want. So in this case, in classic economic liberalism, the idea is that the government does not interfere in kind of the day-to-day workings of business, yet it needs to do things to encourage and to ensure that people have as much economic freedom as possible. Now, one guy that came out in all of this stuff was a man by the name of Thomas Malthus, who wrote something known as the Essay on the Principles of Population, which is perhaps one of the most influential pieces of literature in the 1800s, okay? Now, he talked about stuff that to you and me might sound boring. It's, ooh, population growth. Well, yeah, but in England, there were definitely population problems. And what Thomas Malthus analyzes is he shows that food supply does not necessarily increase at the same rate. It's actually slower. So population grows faster than the food supply. So the basic idea of what's going to end up happening is that severe overpopulation will result in starvation, disease, low wages, and poor housing because we have too many people, so their work isn't going to be valued. But the interpretation that comes out of this is that the government should never interfere with these people because it is natural, okay? And if the government is trying to interfere with the food supply or falsely dealing with wages or anything like that, it's actually going to cause a problem. And so as a result, the idea again of helping the poor and things like that really would not have a government role here. And a lot of people see Malthus as cruel and stuff like that. And I don't think this is necessarily the way that he was getting about it. I think he was looking at a population and he was trying to figure out ways that what can we do to help promote a stable government and less poor people and less people in poverty? Okay, that's my interpretation. There's a positive that comes out of that, and actually something known as Malthusian leagues start to develop. And what these guys were all about were the ideas of birth control. And now, some people in favor of abortion, some people in favor of celibacy before marriage, and then we're going to start to have artificial birth control that comes up, and eventually with the birth control pill and things like that. So like 100 years after this, but still 100 and let's call it 140 years after this. But these ideas of actual birth control, about trying to be more conscious in population growth, is going to be something that's going to be really interesting as we start to move forward. Another guy that was really big here as far as economic liberalism concerned is David Ricardo. And David Ricardo wrote a essay referred to as the Principles of a Political Economy. And in here, he basically develops his iron law on wages, okay? And it's not super fun. Basically, if you look at the chart, and the whole idea behind this is that he believes, or he writes in that when you have an increase of workers, what's going to happen is you're going to have a decrease of wages to the point that they actually fall below sustenance level. Okay, so that's over here, right? Now, as a result, they're going to have fewer children, but that's because there's going to be starvation, and you're going to natural population decrease, okay? So he's building off of Malthus here. But the idea is that because of that, wages will go up. Now, unfortunately, wages will go up, workers will have more children, and then we'll get back to this surplus. But the idea is that the fluctuation of wages is a natural thing that should not be interfered with by the federal government, okay? And so he is not a guy that believes in like minimum wage or anything like that. He's also a big fan of this idea of called comparative advantage, in that international trade is kind of the lifeblood of everything. And even if a nation is really dominant in an area or most areas, it still makes more sense that profits will grow if they allow themselves to have trade, and almost even bringing in other countries' stuff that might compete with their stuff. But that's okay, because again, they have this comparative advantage. So even if you're really good at making wool, it's okay to allow wool imports, because that trade and that competition is actually good. And what that can also do is to promote nations to get better at stuff and to actually almost become the best at certain things. And so even though you do have a quote-unquote comparative advantage with certain products, it's okay to bring those in and keep going with trade. And that's going to be a big thing. Not necessarily free trade, but economic liberals are going to be really big on trade as well. Now, shifting gears, a different thing about political liberalism, which is a little more similar today, is this idea of civil liberties. Okay, and these are increased by some documents, or not increased, but influenced by documents like the American Declaration of Independence and the American Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Man and Citizen from France. And so the whole idea here is that there should be basic rights for people, okay? Things like equality before the law, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom from arbitrary arrest. Okay, really big on religious toleration, okay, with all of that. Separation of church and state. It's okay to peacefully oppose. And really what's crucial is that the minimum type of government, or the necessary type of government in order to achieve these things, is actually at least a constitutional democracy. Sorry, no. See, I combined all those words, but it's okay. It's fine. Yay. Constitutional monarchy or a republican democracy. One of those types of things are really seen as crucial here. And needing to have a parliament who makes laws, and a separate, that parliament is arrived at through elected representation. They're also a big fan of what's called ministerial responsibility. It's basically the foundation of a cabinet system, and that those ministers would be held in check by the legislature versus, say, other ministers that what the monarchs at the time were doing were actually putting ministers in charge of departments who were higher than that of the legislature. So here we're trying to reverse that. And we need to vote more. We need to have at least limited suffrage, at least for men. The right to hold office and vote should sometimes be regulated by property rights. They are big with the middle class with all of this. But a lot of it, again, isn't necessarily about democracy as per se as individual liberties. Now, one guy that was really on the forefront of a lot of this and probably the best known writer at the time was a man by the name of John Stuart Mill. And he basically writes this book on liberty. And the core idea is you have this one quote of absolute freedom of opinion and sentiment on all subjects, that the individual should be protected from both tyranny of the government and censorship, but also tyranny of the majority. That what John Stuart Mill is going to throw out here, and this is going to be a big move and a big idea, is that the minority matters. Okay, just because you're not of the majority of opinion doesn't mean you're actually wrong, which in many cases is true. And just because you make up some type of minority group does not mean that you should be discriminated against. And this is actually kind of groundbreaking because a lot of people did put forth the ideas of individuality and individual rights and things like that. But this idea of protection of the minority is really, really important, and we're going to see this grow. He also is right up there with women. He writes a book on the subjugation of women, and one of his big things here is that the legal subordination of one sex to the other is wrong. Very simple, very straightforward quote that basically his big idea is that, and what he shows in his book is that differences between men and women aren't due to different natures or biology, that in many cases it's social practice, okay? It's that these things have been developed over time, and we need to get over of like women are inferior because they were born as women. Okay, and another big thing is that he pushes this idea of education because he shows the link here that you say that women can't and women can't and women can't. Well, one of the reasons why women can't is they've been prevented from getting the same type of educational levels as men, which did not allow them to rise up, if you will, in academic circles and lead to certain levels of achievement. So, I mean, this is crucial here. I'm a big fan of John Stuart Mill, and a lot of the stuff he was pretty much dead on with this. All right, so that's liberalism. Let's move on to another ism, nationalism, okay? And I only have one slide. I have like thumbs up, thumbs down. Here's the deal with nationalism, okay? It is going to start to grow, and it will lead to more revolts. And here's the big deal with nationalism, guys, okay? When you look at nationalism and the idea of pride in one's country and that you want your country to do things, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. You can get really great achievements in art and science and technology and some great stuff from that idea. However, nationalism can go bad when you start to have this idea of not only is our country great, but then we're better than you. And now if you start getting that whole idea, we're better than you and blah, 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 then, it's not good. And so the 1800s is going to be a time of growing nationalism. We are going to have specific videos that talk about this separately, so I'm going to get there, but we just want to introduce it now. The other ism we're going to get into is socialism on the right. There's an example, socialism. Their influences here, they're really spurred on by awful conditions in slums and mines and factories. They will be associated with the ideas of Karl Marx coming in the later 1800s and communism. We'll get there. You know, the general idea is that basically what people have seen is that what industrial capitalism did was to create a bigger divide between the haves and have-nots, and then show how the have-nots are really being taken advantage of in the world, okay? And what we're going to get, though, is so the first ideas of socialism, and it's not going to be that idea that federal governments need to provide equally for all people. It's not as big as that. Okay, the early idea of socialism is that we're all going to get together and work together in small communities. And what you're going to see here is small communities that will be developed to almost like test this out in a utopian type style. And that's what early implementers would want to do. And so one of the first guys that really starts writing a lot about this is a man by the name of Charles Fourier. He's from France. And his idea is that what we need to do is create small communities known as phalansteries. I probably should have written phalansteries on there, but I'm not going to. You can figure it out. Now, he actually figured out that he felt like through crunching all these numbers that the optimum amount of people in a settlement is 1,620. And the idea here and the practices involved is that you will have community housing. People are going to live and work together for mutual benefit. Work jobs will actually rotate. So maybe you're doing farming for a while, and then you can go to that through maybe some clothes manufacturing, and that you kind of create this self-contained community in which everyone is going to work well together. Interestingly enough, he did recognize this idea that if you do go too big with socialism, it might not work, and we haven't seen that a lot of the time. In other words, large socialist programs sometimes can struggle. Sometimes they can do okay, but sometimes they can struggle. And Fourier was really the guy that's advocating all of that. And so a guy who's going to take a lot of Fourier's ideas and put them into planning is a man by the name of Robert Owen. Robert Owen was actually a British cotton manufacturer, and he saw this. And what he's actually going to do is create a community. He's going to go into Scotland, and he's going to buy some land and create a town called New Lanark. Actually, you see it here. It is still exists today. It's a historical site. And his big kind of concept here, again, is that we're going to go out and we're going to take the ideas of Fourier and socialism and working together and providing everything we need into one spot. Boom, here we go. Now, he had planned to do one in New Harmony, Indiana. Sadly, that is going to fail. That was what it was supposed to be. But New Lanark in Scotland actually lasted for quite a long time. And we're going to see this idea of communes will develop over time, and then eventually we'll get back into like the hippies of the 60s and stuff like that. So these ideas, these utopian communities are going to come in and out, okay? And Europe is kind of into that sometimes. Another guy that is going to go in a different end is Louis Blanc. He writes something called the Organization of Work, and basically he looks at this idea that a lot of social programs can be solved by government assistance, okay, or government programs, okay. He's not a big fan of capitalism and competition because he feels that that's what led to so many of the evils, this cutthroat nature of it all and taking advantage of these workers, and it's always really just about making money. And so he has some ideas of probably his most accepted one, or many that are used, excuse me. Very dry today. Got to keep drinking that water. Will be things like national workshops that are done by the federal government. So you're employed by the federal government, and you can either make clothing or other type of necessities that people can sell. But interestingly enough, they're given money from the government for it. They're owned and operated by workers and then monitored by the federal government. And so really your kind of first idea of like social work programs that are coming out. And France would actually try a number of these. And wait a minute, women also getting involved. Zoe Gaddy de Gaimond, she is going to establish a phalanstery in France, and her goal was actually to give women and men the same educational and work opportunities. And so what she wants to do is to show that not only socialism can work, but in the sense that men and women will be giving the same jobs, like men can do childcare and women can do farming, and to show kind of this idea of collective living in which women and men are sharing in these traditional roles that have been separated between them. And as a result of Zoe's work and others, you're going to see women are going to start to get more involved into political activism. Some are going to be starting some newspapers and really work for what they refer to as female emancipation of equal rights for women. And another woman that really got involved with this was Flora Tristan. She writes a work called Workers' Union in 1843. And what she's really pushing for are the ideas of liberation of women and absolute equality between the sexes, especially in the family. In short term, I will say, unfortunately, a lot of her ideas are ignored. But she also pushes hard for women's education, and in the future, you're going to see is it's women like Zoe Gaudet-Gamond, John Stuart Mill's work as well, and then Flora Tristan that looking at these works and showing how women should be equal and the benefits of that. They are going to work their way eventually into the federal government. You actually see some labor laws that will protect women. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but we do have to start somewhere. But the women's movement that's going to hit in the later 1800s in Britain and then move around the world is really getting itself established at this time. And a lot of it's through women who are either in supportive of socialism, or women who are dealing with some pretty rough things at home as a result of some of the issues with capitalism and industrialization. All right, so there's a bunch of isms, guys. We'll be talking about them in class, and make sure you get some notes, and I'll see you soon.